Welcome to the Foundation Series, your deep dive into startup compensation with industry leaders from across the startup world. Join me, Matt McFarlane, a people operations leader turned compensation specialist, as we uncover the strategies and practices driving success in tech startups around the world. Hear insights from heads of people, founders, and experts as we explore how to build robust compensation frameworks that not only fuel growth and retention, but do so in the dynamic startup environment that we all know and love. Let's get into it. Jesse, welcome to the Foundation Series. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. You're definitely one of the guests that I've been most looking towards having a chat with. No shade to my other guests, but you're obviously an incredibly accomplished professional, someone I've been following for a really long time, certainly much longer than you and I have been, I think, professional friends and things like that. So it's a real pleasure and an honor to have you here. I'd love you to say a quick hello and just share for the few people in the audience who haven't heard of you. Who are you? What do you do? What makes you such a prominent person in my professional development career life?
Thank you so much for the nice intro, Matt. You're the best. I feel like you and I are more than professional friends. We're mates now, aren't we? We're really mates.
For sure.
So who am I? I am a person who has worked pretty much the entire career in HR, now in operations. I'm 5 years in to COO roles now. And I have published a book that is called Built for People. It's all about applying product management principles to HR. And that's mostly what I kind of talk about. Like, it kind of spins on that, basically. The idea of really thinking about HR from a kind of a product commercial lens more than kind of the old school, I would say, way of thinking, which is much more kind of compliance and like service orientated.
I love it. And it's a space and a topic that I'm really excited to focus on here, because I think compensation is such a fascinating topic as it is. I think that product mindset and a lot of what you just talked about in terms of the commerciality that it can bring to a business is an incredible overlap with compensation. And so what I love in particular, and I admitted this before jumping on the call, that I'm only partway through your book, but you're not just someone who is writing the theory. You're not just someone who's kind of spouting things that you've tested in a laboratory environment. You are a, tried and tested, former CPO, now a COO. So you've had the chance to really apply and implement a lot of this thinking and in the real world, which is messy and chaotic. Tell me what some of the ways are that you think or you have leveraged this product mindset when it comes to building the comp processes for the various startups you've worked at.
First, I'm actually so excited to talk about something so not niche, sorry. That's anyone listening here is like, comp isn't that niche, but something that's like specific, right? Like, I really love that we're talking about something that is, I actually think like it's the underpinning and the most important part of employment, in my opinion. One of the, right? Like, was writing a blog today where the opening sentence is like, what do you want to get out of work? Money, success, company branded swag, but of course, underpinning all this is this financial element. Like, that just absolutely is part of it. People need to work to get money. Most people. So the way that I kind of think about comp in this product lens is very much kind of inspired by pricing in the product world. And I think one of the differences or like the interesting parts of taking that approach is growing up, in quotes, in HR. I think the kind of mindset that I was taught was very much around like, we do what the market is doing. It's always this kind of like reactive copycatting type element of how we do things. Like, rather than necessarily be like what are our competitors doing per se, it was almost just like, go and get a Radford and just pull the data and then we'll just copy that. And didn't really think that much about what are we actually trying to achieve with this pricing. You kind of very disconnected from the financials. Like, the money was almost just a reflection of the research of the market and not so much actually about like what was actually happening in the company, if that makes sense. And, we can go into a little bit more detail there. But I really think that one of the really practical things I've done with my team is kind of guide them down the thinking of, think about this like pricing much more than just getting a market rate out.
Yeah, it's kind of that thing of like, if you do what everyone else does, you'll get the same results as everyone else gets, right? And so I really love this approach of like, you really need to make it be something that speaks about who you are as a company. And it's an extension of your culture, if not like a really more foundational aspect of your culture, right? And it should reflect that. It should be polarizing. That's something that I talk about a lot as well with people is like, you don't want everyone in the world to look at your package and go, oh, there's something, there for me. It's kind of really just, it's vanilla. It's kind of blasé. You want it to speak strongly to the people that you want to hire, and it doesn't want to be attractive to the people that you don't want to hire. And so that's really how I see it. And I think it ties into really being market informed, not market led. Talk to us a bit more about how you've kind of seen this approach work in your experience or in the experience of others.
I think one of my favorite stories is something that we're really seeing the success of now at Talentful. And I think the kind of immediacy of this for us is really helpful to hopefully the listeners as well. So context, COO of a company called Talentful. Talentful are in the managed services world. We essentially provide embedded modern kind of RPO solutions to tech businesses. So we partner with really big tech companies. You absolutely would have heard of them. You think for tech company, we probably are working with them. Recruitment, unsurprisingly to our dear listeners, I'm sure, has been through the fucking ringer. Sorry, I hope I can swear. You're Australian, I'm Australian.
Totally. If it's an Australia-based podcast, I would be,
good.
would be weird without it.
All the Australians listening are like, she swore. I didn't even hear any word there. So, so I think we've really been through it the last couple of years, right? Like, recruitment is in a lot of ways, I think, kind of a canary in the coal mine of like what else is happening in the tech world. And if you're seeing something really like dramatic happen there, you're probably going to see it happen to your rest of your functions for the next like 6 to 18 months. So we went through COVID, or just after COVID, we saw that massive ramp that so many of the tech companies did, where just growth went through the roof. And then afterwards, the crash, right? And a lot of us really felt that personally. There's a lot of people who were impacted in terms of losing their roles or having their roles significantly impacted, or really in the context of comp, having their comp totally frozen, right? Like companies made this decision, and Talentful was no different, to say we're going to freeze comp, we're going to freeze promotions. Now, and I don't want to say this from a place of like, if you're someone out there that's made this decision in the past, I am sure you've made this decision with a lot of things happening at once. You're in the rock and a hard place. You need to make a quick choice. And this is one of those first levers that people pull is like, let's suspend comp. Let's just pause it. Or comp reviews, I should say. I personally think it's probably one of the worst things you can do as a leader in HR. Like I would say this is like, you only pull this if you are on the brink of immediate bankruptcy, basically.
Yeah.
And
it's a last ditch.
It's an absolute last ditch. Even then, I would still really question why. So I'll tell you like some of the reasons I really struggle with this is like, first of all, and we saw this, you never actually really fully freeze comp, do you? Because inevitably there's someone that actually does get some kind of promotion for some reason. Or there's somebody that threatens to leave and they're critical to a project. And then you're kind of in this very strange bargaining position where you have to pick between uniformity and exception. And that's never a good place to be in. So first of all, it's rarely true. That's the first thing. And if things aren't true, then people will hear. Even if you decide to kind of run a kind of secret operation, a covert promotion operation or a covert comp change operation, people talk, absolutely. Like we all talk about this when it comes to comp. Like transparency is more than just a legislation. It's also just human nature. So I think that's the next thing is people will find out that there's like some covert operation. It breeds hypocrisy. It breeds mistrust. And I've just lost one of my earrings there. I'm going to take both of them out. And the last thing is, this is again, like it's fundamental, right? It's fundamental. It's the most important part of your employee experience, in my opinion, in order to have like a kind of the actual product, like the product you're selling is a job where people earn money, right? So in order to take away the value from that fundamental, you're immediately kind of corrupting the agreement that you have with someone, whether that be in contract or just there's a psychological contract we all sign when we take a job, which is that I'm going to be able to increase the quality of my living through this job. And if I can't, then you've breached contract with me.
Yeah.
Right? So we did make that decision. And I say all these like reasons why I think this is a terrible decision, not to disenfranchise or, discredit the team that made it, because again, I actually think a lot of the reasons that this was decided on were like urgency, immediacy, and justified. But I say it because I think it's important to know that like, everybody has made these kinds of mistakes or decisions in the past that then you have to rectify it. So we come out of 2023 and we're in a better place, but by no means are we in a stable place as a business. And what we have now is a year of pent up frustration and anger from our entire team about the fact that they both haven't had comp changes, and we've, again, like these kind of breaches of trust, micro and macro, have happened within the team. I am handed really an extremely dedicated workforce who have been through a really tough year and a really engaged leadership team who really want to resolve this. But it's a challenging problem because we still don't necessarily have the kind of financial view and stability coming out of 2023 into 2024. Like, no one really did at that stage. We'd seen so much volatility. And we have to figure out, how do we solve this problem as quickly and effectively as we can without kind of causing ourselves more strategic risk? Because the other problem we have is we don't want to have to run more redundancies in the future, right? Like, that's just not something.
Yeah, it's another trust crushing exercise, isn't it?
Exactly. So we went away and we had to think. I said to the team in January 2024 that we were going to go and review compensation. And so we did that. And what we've found, unsurprisingly, is that talent salaries had kind of, if not stagnated, actually regressed. And this is actually a really interesting problem. And I'm sure anyone out there listening that's in kind of either customer support roles, also same thing. They've really stagnated and regressed as the AI transformations. And even just things like copy editors, copywriters, places where we're being really disrupted by AI. So this is an ongoing problem in other functions and other industries. We still wanted to incentivize our team. So what we decided to do was implement a kind of newly formatted, very strategic variable compensation program for our entire team that was much more focused, almost like it's close to a profit share. It's not exactly a profit share, but it's close to a profit share in methodology, where we are meritocratically distributing bonuses at the end of every quarter based on our performance as a company and also the team's performance individually, right? So there's both an element of strong performance incentive there, but also really being driven by actually how well are we doing as a company, with the view and the message that this would continue to grow and evolve and help benefit people as the company recovered through this time. This again is really, when I'm thinking about it, this is I just kind of was trying to get inspired by what was happening in pricing markets, pricing tests. What do companies do when they're trying to price to a set of consumers that are now not so interested in their product for some reason? That's not exactly the analogy that I think I would apply to our team, but that's what I was inspired by, looking for places where customers, the willingness to pay had, just diminished. And what I was finding in the market from consumer products and B2B products that were building these kinds of things is they started doing things like building freemium, having base tiers with add-ons. Again, when you think about that, it's just variable pricing, right? You've got a set pricing tier and then you're adding variable pricing on top of that. The more successful you are at engaging those consumers, the more pricing you can layer on top of it. And that was really the aha moment that I had of okay, how can we build that into what we're doing here to really leverage engagement while keeping ourselves sustainable through this change? And now we're at a place where 26% of our team were promoted in 2024, and we've raised the average salaries across our team, not leadership. I want to kind of stress that, by more than 10%. So we've seen really large pay changes for our team, and that is a combination of variable and base. But I want to say that's paid. We've paid that out. This is not potential. This is actually paid out 10% salary changes.
Yeah, amazing. I love as well that you I think collectively there's these themes of your stakeholders are obviously your people here. There's a real goal around, rebuilding trust, about ensuring that people have a stake in the company, things like that. We've talked about market informed versus market led. I'd really love to understand what role did that stakeholder as an employee play in this sort of a process? And maybe not just for that example, but generally, because I think a lot of companies shy away from involving their people in compensation discussions and decisions, which is crazy when you think about, the fact that they are the people that can help you build something that is truly catered to the kind of, organization, environment, and the talent that you want. You should absolutely be speaking to them. So yeah, what's your experience been on that front?
Yeah, I think so. Goes without saying, again, talking about the topic of the book that I wrote, but user research is really important to me. And I think it's really important to say that user research doesn't necessarily mean that you go away and do exactly what your users say they want. That kind of trite but true quote, people say they want faster horses, comes into mind. So when you're pricing a product, you do pricing analysis, you do pricing analysis, you do go out and run pricing surveys, you do kind of understand willingness to pay. And that's part of the process that we took as well. So we sent out essentially like a compensation survey, which tried to focus mostly on like the problems people were having with comp, not the ideas that they wanted. So we didn't say, what would you like to see necessarily? We said, like, what are the things that you're really frustrated about? What are the things that are really upsetting you? So that we could get a better understanding of the problem statements and then apply solutions based on other inputs of feedback. And some of those other inputs of feedback were just genuine conversations with people, like, how are you actually feeling about what do you think is like a good enough pay rise? Like some of those conversations. And some of those things were just data, like actually pulling out from our HRIS, like what were in the periods of time where people were least likely to leave the team in certain cohorts, what was the average pay changes to those people? Looking at pay change data, we did know around exits. So a question we do ask people is like, if you're leaving because of compensation reasons, like, can you give us some kind of insight into the rough range of differential between what we're offering, what they're offering? And of course, not everyone wants to give you that information. That's completely their prerogative. But some people do actively say like, yeah, look, this new role I'm getting is this is the difference. So all of that data also helped inform us because we had data that was being given to us where there wasn't an incentive. And I think this is actually a really important part of the user research. When you're asking people a question, when I go out as a COO and say, we're looking at comp and then run a survey and say, what would you like? No one is incentivized to say, oh, we're good. Don't worry about us. Or like, oh, just, whatever the minimum you can is, like everyone is incentivized to say, well, as much as possible, right? Of course, because that's how it works. So what you need to look for is more unbiased sources of that data. And that is the kind of the forward-looking data. But the things people aren't going to be biased about is the problems they're actually facing because they want you to solve those problems, right? So that's very much the approach that I took to the compensation like research.
Yeah. And I love, again, like I feel like this is going to be a big theme of this discussion, this whole like market informed versus market led, because I know I've certainly worked in organizations where the bands that we get that are built on the market are, we stick to those no matter what, even if we can't hire or if people are leaving because of them or if we're having issues with internal mobility. And so really this approach of being, market informed, but actually are they working for our business? Like you don't want to be so tied to your comp bands that they're actually working to the detriment of the organization. And I think your exit poll example is a great one, but yeah, on the front end as well, are we actually even being able to hire the people that we want? Are these working the way that we hope is another fantastic piece of feedback. And I think we've sort of talked about this approach, which again, I think is quite novel for companies, but about building comp in the open in a way.
Yeah.
What do you think are the ways to do that really effectively without losing trust? Because I think a lot of the feedback or certainly the discussion that I have with people who are concerned about being, or the wave of pay transparency is like, what if we get it wrong? I think a lot of HR people or people are expected to know and have the answer and be resolute in decisions and actions and implementations. How can you take this approach, which is again, very much that product mindset of like, let's build something, let's test it, let's iterate it. How can you take that approach with comp without kind of losing trust along the way, do you think?
Yeah. I think transparency is a spectrum. And again, like you need to apply what's right for your business. So I'm going to talk to you about two like very kind of polarized examples from my own history. One of them is Whereby and one of them is Talentful. Whereby is a SaaS business that is, and I think was very well known for its kind of approach to how to employ and how to engage your employees in this process. We had a completely transparent, more or less, compensation methodology that you could publicly access. So we weren't quite Buffer where they have I think one end of the spectrum is like every single person's salary, what you're going to get paid. We were kind of one row down from that, which is we will share for you our entire philosophy of how we get there. We will share all of the salaries on all of our job ads, which is now just pretty much standard. And during the interview process, we do not negotiate because of that. Like we have a very thorough approach to how we do this. And we can talk a little bit more about Whereby. And then Talentful, on the other end, we are a services company where our people are our product. We are selling our team and their knowledge and their experience into other businesses, which means our pricing is pegged very closely to our salaries, right? So for a couple of reasons, we don't want to be out there sharing exactly our framework to the entire world because that's essentially us sharing our price book. It's just us sharing a lot of information that is proprietary. It's ours, right? It's a significant competitive risk for us to be like extremely transparent about that information. But we do want our team, crucially, to feel like they're being paid fairly, that there is a consistent narrative behind what we're making these decisions, that there's a methodology behind it, and that they understand what this means for them. Where do they sit? What's the next step? So we have a transparent salary framework and methodology that we've published internally that everyone in the team has access to. And we share the kind of broad figures, not necessarily the numbers, but we share, like, for example, a move from this range to this range is this percent. And this is what those skills are that you require. This is the requirement to reach this bonus level. This is how this bonus level is achieved from a company perspective. And for us, that level of transparency works very, very effectively. But for whereby that might not actually have been the best approach. So I think that, like, to kind of answer your question in a much more succinct way, I think sometimes people work in this kind of work, see companies like Whereby or like Buffer and say, well, that's what this needs to look like in order to be successful. So one of two things happen. They either kind of melt down and do something that doesn't work well for the team, or they do nothing at all. They just say, well, we can't possibly make this solution applicable to us. But I think you have to be maybe a little bit more adaptive to the strategy of the business again.
Yeah. Like, so I think the lessons there are that, like, you've got these stakeholders, right? But you've got to factor in your internal and your external stakeholders, like the fact that you are an MSP and the fact that you can't be out there, you know, being Buffer to the world for Talentful makes sense. And it makes sense for your business as a commercial entity. And then, but you know, obviously transparency internally is still incredibly valuable, and you don't want to lose out on the trust that builds with the organization. So you do it in a way that's right for you.
Completely. And I think just like one more little thing is, like, again, like kind of using this, like the kind of product pricing analogy, it works perfectly well that there are some products in this world that you expect a price tag on them. Like my monthly phone bill, if they tell me it's going to be whatever we charge you, I would be
competitive.
Like, that's not, it's competitive, unacceptable. But if I'm buying like a secondhand Hermes bag from a supplier that's like sourcing a vintage item for me, I'm perfectly happy with the idea that here's my range. It's somewhere there. It's going to be obfuscated. I'm not going to be sure of what this is. It's a completely different product, right? And I think if you acknowledge that you as a consumer do have, like, you're capable of containing and understanding that nuance, you can apply that same thing to your business, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Again, it's got to be unique. It's got to be tied to you. What about ways that you think over time? So I think there's very much that kind of, like, you know, we're drawing a line in the sand, we're taking this approach we're implementing our newest comp practices. What about over time? How have you seen comp practices iterate, not only from a stakeholder, you know, perspective, but I guess, you know, here I'm thinking of the stakeholders of business too, but like as startups inevitably scale too, what are the key sort of ways in which you see comp practices and strategies tend to change or iterate over time?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in building things like MVP. Like you build like the minimum viable product. Like, what actually do you really need at this point in time? I think this is like another thing, just general advice for HR leaders. But like comp, leveling, progression, these things are intrinsically deeply connected. There is no reason that you, a VP people or a head of people at a 20-person startup, need a 20-layer comp framework with 7 progression tracks and tiers and like alternating steps. Like, absolutely not. You do not need that. What do you need to get the job done now and in maybe 6 to 12 months time, really? Like 6 to 12 months time, I think is like kind of the, like between 6 to 12 months is like kind of the pointy end. You want to kind of build your comp structure like a teenager buying a suit, right? Like you want it to fit and not look ridiculous, but you want it to fit you for a little bit more, right? So what that means is that you're inevitably going to build something that has like fewer levels, that has fewer tracks, and that has a little bit more room for interpretation and discretion. And it should, because you shouldn't have to invent the wheel every year and have someone come in and do a comp analysis for you. You should be able to kind of self-manage that until you get to a certain point. And then I think when you get to the point where you're starting to really layer in management kind of changes the game, because management is a new skill and there's different ways you can interpret that. Some businesses interpret management as just a different like track completely. So it's a completely different comp structure. Some people say it's just a skill set within our current comp structure, like valued to the same amount as an IC, right? You need to figure out where you live within that. And then I think it kind of grows in complexity when you start adding in then geographic elements. And again, a lot of startups might be like, we're fully remote, but we keep things quite simple. We pay everyone in this region. We pay everyone in this framework. But once you start genuinely operating like 6 entities with 500, 600 people, that starts to break down a little bit, right? So I think the 2 big tipping points are going to be management and geography. And then the final tipping point that I will layer on here is when your stock options become really worth something, when you're no longer pegging them to like an intrinsic future value that you're kind of aspirationally selling into VCs, but instead you're going public or there's a merger or an acquisition on the horizon. That's the next and final layer where all of a sudden there's like a new level of complexity you need to add into your comp program that you probably should have already been thinking about, but now people will start really pushing you on.
Yeah, somewhere that equity becomes very, very appealing as part of the total rewards package, doesn't it? I think you touched on something as well that is a question I commonly get around your job level structure, and it's whether to adopt something that already exists, because there's 1,001 job level frameworks that you can download right now off the internet, and if you're buying compensation data, it comes with it, versus having your own that is made for you. And I think so often, a company will implement something and use something that has, 3 gaps between where someone sits on their job level, and it's like it's not right size for you. And so, starting with something that is, and then maybe growing into something that is built for an enterprise environment may make sense.
Yeah, I do think with the job leveling frameworks, I know we've spent a long time now just talking about like create things that are right for you and that are unique. There are also many things that I just think should be out of the box. Like just do the thing that people get. I do actually think progression frameworks is one of these things. Again, like keep it simple. You don't need to be like ripping off, Facebook's or Meta's one, which I think is going to be way too complicated for the vast majority of us. Like SMEs or like up to even 1,000 people, it might be too complicated. But there are certain things that you want people to just read and be like, oh, I already get this. Like I already understand what this means. And I actually do think like, if you're creating a job leveling structure from scratch, I would really scratch my head and wonder like why.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that are available that you can certainly, at the very
Adapt.
least, be informed by if you are going to build your own. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I want to go back to something you touched on, having built for Talentful, around this concept of pay for performance and the model that you built for Talentful. But just generally as a topic, I think is something that's very interesting to a lot of people, certainly founders at the moment, is like, it's a more competitive environment. How do we ensure that we are actually incentivizing performance? But the thing I want to talk to you about, because I think you've given a really great example of when a pay for performance model works, is when can it actually be a liability? When can it work against you? Either, a previous experience or just even companies that are considering it. What would be your kind of like, don't do it just yet, or unless these things are satisfied?
Wow, what a great question. I think there's a couple things that immediately come to mind. The first one is if you're tying first of all, you probably should be anyway, but if you are more directly tying performance to comp, you have to really be diligent about how you manage performance. People are not going to tolerate you basing it on like a 360 feedback form on a Google form anymore. Like you're going to need to be really thinking like, how are we calibrating this? What's quantifiable? Are there like actual... and this is another thing that we have in our back pocket at Talentful. Our performance to some degree is pretty quantified, right? Like we know how much revenue is being driven by our account directors. We know how many hires people are making, and that's what drives performance on our accounts. We know what the CSAT scores are. We know NPS. Like, there's a lot that we know. Now, of course, there are definitely...
It's very metricized.
Exactly. There are definitely behaviors that we still want to be measuring that are very important to us. So things like adaptability, again, in like managed service, you want people that can move from account to account. That's very important. So we want to measure that. We want to be able to actually incentivize people to be adaptable. Now, this is something our clients don't care about as much as we do, because they want you to work on their account, but they don't really care if you work on the account you're on next. Like, that's not their problem. So I'd say the first thing is like really understand like what is like, you need to be good at actually talking about performance. That needs to be very transparent to people, because that's the thing that they are looking at and saying like, this is the thing that's going to help me get more money and help me actually achieve the things that you're promising me that we're going to achieve. So if you go out and say, we're going to do a pay for performance model, and it's going to be based on your manager discretion and like 360 feedback, I think you're going to have a lot of people that are really frustrated when they don't understand the methodology behind some decisions that are being made. And I think the other thing as well is variable compensation is, I think, somewhat rightly seen as a risk for a lot of people. It is like, I talk about this in like more of my ops and finance world when I'm talking to like the revenue team. Not every dollar is worth the same amount. A dollar from a customer that pays every month on time is worth way more to me than a dollar from a customer that's a real pain that never pays on time. And I think for a lot of people, their interpretation, whether you like this or not, is that variable compensation is a customer that's really difficult and doesn't pay. A lot of people have started working for companies before, where they've been told that they're going to get a 20% bonus, and then they never get a letter, they never get the information, they never get told. And then the end of the bonus year comes and someone says like, oh yeah, sorry, we'll work on that next year. So people have been burned. So the interpretation from a lot of people is, you're a customer that's not going to pay your invoice on time. I don't want this. Like, it's already too much trouble. So they prefer the variable comp, the base comp. So you need to be thinking about that from the get-go. Like, how are you going to really tackle that incentive? But also, it's going to take longer to warm people up to the idea. You have to promise, deliver a lot longer with a variable compensation scheme than you do with a base rate change. And that means that you need to be a little bit more patient, and you need to be a lot more communicative, I think.
Yeah, I love those tips. I was trying to think what the lesson there is, but you summed it. We've kind of touched on this around like the fact that you're always, especially in a startup environment, you're sort of always building for today and the sort of near future. Mm-hmm. What are some other ways that you think, and maybe more from a compensation or a total rewards side, do you think that companies can ensure that they're not kind of like hampering agility? Because I think that one of the common things that often comes up for job level frameworks in particular is like, oh, are we being too defined? Are we kind of actually preventing people from, stepping outside of this box to do other things, which is such a critical, requirement or attitude when you're at a startup? What's your advice around ensuring that you can kind of keep it, almost fuzzy in the sense that it gives people a sense of where they are and where they want to be, but it's not too limiting in that respect? But yeah, I guess across both job levels and pay bands in particular.
So I am a really big fan of discretion still. Like, I still like discretion. I think discretion with parameters is like the way that I would like to think about it. So at Whereby, one of the things that we had, there's a couple of things I think that I'm going to throw in here as an answer. The first one is, we did compensation hurdles rather than compensation bands. So we said, this is the minimum you're going to get paid for this job. And then you could, in theory, get paid infinitely above that, right? There's no upper band. We just said, like, we go up and up and up. And what we focus on there is the fact that, like, tenure at Whereby, a company like, a deep engineering company, tenure means a lot. And actually, the things that were really motivating our team, we found out wasn't really title changes or promotions that much. Like, again, going back to this, what's the customer really in this for? They were much more motivated by the flexibility we had as a company, the technical problems they were solving. So we said, okay, well, where do we give that to them? So we had a hurdle. We said, if you're going to join this role, the minimum you'll get paid is, say, £50,000. Every year we will review that, and we will increase that based on how the company's performing. So the budget we have to distribute to everybody, and your performance. There's a meritocratic element of that again, and it's always calibrated. And you could stay in that role for 7, 8, 9 years and never get a promotion and get new comp every year. That's more than inflation, right? It could be like, one year we gave, I think the average engineering salary increase was almost 15% after COVID, right? Like, we had a massive year during that massive boom. So I would say that's one way you can do this. Then on the back, that's very like beneficial to the consumer. The back office problem that it then results in is, what happens if you don't have such a great year and you've got a lot of people that have like received increases in compensation significantly that you now have to kind of like make good on continuously. And that's where you need to be really, really good at like your kind of financial management, forecasting, budgeting, and like distributing that cash in an ethical and fair way that it's not going to hinder you in the future. So it's kind of putting the responsibility back on you, but also giving a benefit to your team, I think. I think the other thing that we added in was, again, another discretionary piece was, we had that hurdle, and then on joining, so we'd say, like, again, minimum salary of £50,000. We have someone that joined, we would always say to people, like, there's no negotiation. You see the salary of the job ad, we pay what we think is a 90th percentile. We pay in London, we pay in the US average, and we pay globally those two salaries. So if we're hiring you in Portugal, then it's almost certain that you're getting a really good deal in terms of what your market rate is in that region if you're going to apply to an on-site job. Now, that no negotiation rule, one thing we did do is, so in our job interviews, first interview we'd say, I'm sure you saw the job ad, you're sure you saw the comp. was that close to what you were expecting? Any concerns with that? Any problems with that? Know that what we discussed in this call, we're not going to negotiate going forward. This is the last time we're going to talk about compensation. And someone might say, actually, I'm really looking for 53,000 or 55,000. There's reasons why, whatever. What we did say is that because we have this upper hurdle, right? So our teams are all paid slightly differently. There's always a justification for it. Is we would say to managers, you have a 10% discretion that you can decide in that call with that person and say, look, if you really want 53, we will interview you with 53,000 in mind. But keep in mind when we go through this process, we've had this conversation with other candidates. We're not going to negotiate with them either. We'll always pay the minimum. And when we give you that offer, that's the offer, right? So it's 53. If we get to that point, you get that offer. Managers had 10% that they could move within, just at their own discretion, as long as they made a decision that we believed was justified. My thinking on that was that 10% pay changes you can retrospectively kind of correct without having huge organizational problems. Then we went from 10 to 20%, where if a manager came to me and said, look, this person's actually they're an engineer who's also a designer that's worked at a competitor. They've managed a team in the past and now want to go to being an IC, but will help us lead projects. Can we offer them 60,000? I would then say okay, great. Look, if there's a justification and if those things are proven during the interview process and they add that value, let's make sure that's baked into their new job description. It's a different job and we should sell that into them accordingly. And what we actually found through that process is there was actually times where we would go back and change our team's salaries based on conversations that would happen in interviews as well. So we had one engineering manager who was interviewed, hired, went through the process, said what they wanted. We got to the offer, gave them the offer. They accepted the offer. They started. I think it might have even been in their first month. We were interviewing another engineering manager, very similar skill set. And they said, I'm after 10% more. We looked at the skills and we said, this person's worth it. They absolutely aced the interview. So we went back to the new hire and said, we're raising your salary 10%. And that's kind of the checks and balances that we had to put in place. But I think it gives you a good example of trying to use discretion in managed ways that allows for agility and allows for flexibility. And that also still, again, incentivizes your team to acknowledge that okay, so there's a structure here, but if I do certain things and change certain parts of my job and achieve new skills that aren't on the framework, then actually I'm going to be compensated for that. And to also 10 years compensation. So those things are good.
Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of things I love about that example. I mean, I think in particular, the hurdles not bands concept, and just especially in, I think, an environment we're in now, I think, just after COVID, everyone, there's so much money, everyone's company was growing so quickly that actually the incentive of promotion made sense, because someone could probably be realistically promoted every year if a company was growing, halfway decent. And often I find that upper limit, you need to come up with some kind of mechanism to not make people feel like they have to be promoted all the time to get a comp increase. And so I really like the idea that a hurdle can be there as a minimum threshold, as a floor, but your ceiling could theoretically be unlimited, but is going to be based on these criteria. And actually, you as an individual don't have to go on and do a different job. You do have to still grow as a professional and as a capable individual, no doubt. But and that's what's being reflected. But you're not incentivized suddenly to go. Formerly it used to be all your best engineers become a manager, or they all have to want to become principal engineers. No, you can be a senior engineer and be one forever if you like, and it's not going to hinder your earning capacity, which I really, really like the idea of.
Yeah, I think I'm not a huge fan of tenure-based pay changes just by default. There's some companies out there that do every year you get a 2%. But I am a big fan of, I actually felt very comfortable justifying a senior engineer earning more than a newly hired staff engineer. A senior engineer been with the team for 5 years, earning more than a staff engineer. I think a lot of people will be like, well, that's crazy. How did your staff engineer feel about that? I was like, well, the staff engineer came with a lot of great staff engineer level skills that we needed. But that senior engineer knows our code base back to front. That skill is worth that extra money, in my opinion.
100%. And I think as well, I really like how you talked about almost this, you're kind of separating the role from the individual as well when you were talking about, what we're going to offer. And I think not being too rigid on this is the role that we expect from you, and to the extent that it limits you as well. If you are bringing someone in who brings the skills that you need for the role plus so much more, they are more diverse, they are more adaptable. So how can you make sure that you're compensating that effectively as well? They're both really fascinating concepts to me.
I'm glad you like it.
All right, as I guess we sort of start to bring this to a close, I'd love to ask you, like, again, you've got such incredible experience and obviously we reflected on a lot of that. If you had to redo an entire compensation rollout from your past, and it could have even been a successful one, but you're like, actually, it could have been more successful, what would you have done differently, do you think?
Oh, there's so many things. I'm one of those people that like literally will stay up at night, like cringing at work that I've done in the past. I think if you're a person, and I know you're one of these people too, who like loves open sourcing things as well. I look at some of my old work that I've like shared proudly with the world and I'm like,
It's a rite of passage.
It's a rite of passage. I mean, anyway, that's a whole thing. But there's like two things that come to mind. I think the first example is a Talentful one. And during this rollout I've just described as being successful, I didn't consider my own personal limitations in the rollout. Let me explain what this means. I am an extremely procedural person. I'm very, like, I went to law school. I love structure. I work in ops, right? I manage the finance team. I love structure. I love spreadsheets. Our team, by and large, is actually very different than that, right? Like, not all of them. Of course, there's some, like, extremely, like, spreadsheet-oriented recruiters in our team, but there's a lot of people that are really, like, they're very people. That's, like, and that's their strength. That's their skill. I love that for them. I went out and I presented this comp change like I would present a new piece of legislation. I was like, I'm going to walk you through, this is the methodology we follow. This is the problem statement. This is the like, and then finally, here's the solution. Here's the outcome. Congratulations, you're all getting like an uplift. What 200 people heard from that, and you know, rightfully so, was here's a bunch of excuses why this isn't going to be as good as it could be. There's a big, long diatribe about a process we don't care about, or that, like, is it interesting, or we don't understand. And I don't want to, like, absolutely don't want to sound patronizing to them. Like, I think they were waiting. They've been waiting for a year to hear the outcomes of this. And I presented the message the way that I would like to hear the message, which is, what's the process you went to? So I learned from that, like, it doesn't matter how good your methodology is, if you're still not targeting the message, the communication to the audience that are receiving it, like, you're going to be in hot water, right? And this is actually a thing that you actually see a lot in like pricing rollouts as well from like companies. Like the amount of times actually a really not a bad pricing idea is badly managed because some founder posts a blog that's really like self-serving and customers like revolt. Those kinds of things, I think, like that's a big learning for me. It's like, don't let your own limitations get in the way of a rollout. And the second thing that comes to mind is when I was much more junior, I worked at a company called Wonderbly. I was the head of people there. And we wanted to move away from just pure chaos comp reviews. So like founders were running them independently on people's anniversaries, completely unforecastable, very like discretionary, into something much more structured. And I wanted this to be like a feather in my cap. Again, letting myself get in the way of a good rollout. I wanted to do the best ever comp structure ever, which is, by the way, stupid. Like, you want to do the most effective one for the time you're doing it and then move on. Like, get an expert like you into the room and be like, teach me what I need to do to get this successful, and then I can do it again in 2 years' time. I invested so much time and energy into this thing. I did the classic HR, go away into a back room, develop this independently, come up with this big like framework and structure and 9-box grid and like calendar of everything. I implemented it. It looked great. I wrote a blog about it, I'm pretty sure. And everyone that reads HR stuff was like, this looks great, because it's like the stuff that we lap up. We lap up like frameworks and spreadsheets. The team looked at this and was like, whoa, this is worse. This is more structure and more confusing and more documents. Exactly. So yeah, I think the two big learnings from that is like, don't let yourself get in the way of this. Like, it is a task you have to do. It is not something that, it's not a badge, it's not a Girl Scout badge, right? Like, it's a job that you have to get done. Treat it as such. If you do a good job, that's the feather you get to put in your cap.
Yeah, that's such a good lesson. And I think like another thing there is just you don't have to overcook it. Like, I think from my own experience, and certainly the experience of everyone else I've ever spoken to ever about compensation, is that the bar is so often very low when it comes to good comp practices. And so even some really formative things like just saying, hey, here's what we do today. People probably either didn't know that, or they had a different interpretation from another colleague or a different place they work. And so they've made assumptions. Like, I think you can start to get started. And And it doesn't have to be this massive like mental obstacle or hurdle to build something that is better than what you had. Even just simply writing a Notion doc and saying, here's what we do today. Just in case you didn't know, here's how often we do a pay review. Surprise. And here's what it's based on. And like, just get that stuff out there. And then, feedback. You don't have to go into this back room and build this like Goliath thing and then suddenly be like, oh, it didn't really land. But I appreciate it. Thank you so much for being vulnerable with those two excellent examples.
Hashtag vulnerability.
Survivor. HR survivor. What would you say, like, a question I always love asking is like, what's a bad piece of comp advice that's widely accepted? Because I feel like there's probably a lot, but from your perspective, what's one bad piece you've seen? Can you narrow it down?
There's like, I feel one thing, which I'm trying to think of something like slightly controversial because I love to be that person.
Let's do it.
We've kind of already talked about this, but I do think that people that just like wildly go after full transparency without really thinking about it is one thing. Like, you have to have an obligation to be completely transparent about this. Actually, I think that's kind of bad advice. Sometimes you're not ready. Sometimes you shouldn't. We just talked about an example of that. Transparency means wildly different things to different people. So I always get a little miffed when people say that. The other thing I think is I'm not a huge fan of is like strong location pegging. Like weak location pegging I'm into. So again, it depends what you're doing. If you're a company that's just operating like a warehouse in the rural part of Portugal, then do strong compensation pegging, go hard. If you are a kind of remote company that's employing people in a broad region and you are picking to do a salary assessment for every individual to try and get as close to the cost of living in those locations as possible, you have made yourself an absolute hair nest that you're going to have to pull yourself out of. And I still see this advice going around from time to time. Someone's like, oh yeah, what I do is we peg everything to cost of living in every single region, every single county in the world. Rough.
Yeah.
That's my
it's
two.
Heavy.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah, transparency it's popular and it's coming, and I think it's necessary and I think it's important, but it's still going to be done for you. And I think I obviously love paid transparency, anybody that follows me, but it has to be done right. And I think there's so many steps that have to come before transparency, which is fundamentally somebody knowing what you value their role as. But it could be the buffer example, which is everybody, even outside of the company, knowing what you're being paid. There's a spectrum there and you have to work out what's right for you. And some of that's dictated by legislation, but the rest of it absolutely needs to be determined by who you are as a company and what you're trying to achieve. And we keep coming back to who are you and why are you making this work for, your stakeholders. So it's an important lesson that bears repeating. Amazing. I mean, last question for me, like heads of people, compensation's a tricky subject for those of them that are facing off, against having to build or do or undertake pay in their startup. Any parting words of wisdom, any final tips you'd share for those who are looking at it in 2025?
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of like the big kind of lessons that I feel like I've learned. I think like the don't overcook it thing is really what comes to mind. I think, this is general advice, comp or otherwise. Focus on the problem you're trying to solve and solve that problem. Don't solve every future problem, every possible iteration, every exception. What's the thing that's really frustrating people? What's the thing that's not going to work as you grow for the next 6 to 12 months? And then solve those things, right? And sometimes, actually, most of the time, the answer is probably tighten this up, get rid of this completely. Once you find yourself tightening something up, getting rid of this completely, building this thing, running a workshop, creating a doc, creating a PDF, sharing out a training, I think you're already in too deep.
Yeah. An excellent tip.
Yeah. And also part of this one that I like use, like, actually, no, here's a better piece of advice. Sorry, I'm gonna extract this. Don't hire a permanent comp and ben person if you're less than 1,000 people. That's like my first. You're less than 1,000 people, your attrition is not high enough, your salary review is not high enough, your complexity is not high enough. Go and find someone that is an expert like you once a year, bring them in for a 12-week or 6-week sprint or something and smash an excellent project that solves a problem. Invest the money there. Hiring a permanent comp and ben person like any person that has like a very specific specialty that you have to employ full time, wants to build a whole world around that thing. And like we just described, you don't need a whole world around that thing yet. And you won't until you're 1,000 people, probably more. That's my advice.
Sage advice. Thank you very much for the plug. And I think in return, for anyone who's listening, Jess, you are an incredible person to follow on LinkedIn for many, many insights. You obviously have a phenomenal book, which is already phenomenal and only 25% of the way through. So I'm already saying that, singing the praises. You publish amazing articles online as well. So for anyone that's listening, please go and follow and buy all of those things. And otherwise, just a massive thank you. This has been so insightful. I think I've definitely learned some incredible things from this as well. So thank you. So much knowledge bombs dropping everywhere. I appreciate it.
Oh, I love it. And I will definitely give you a shout next time I'm in Brizzy for a couple of pints, I reckon.
Let's do it.
Absolutely, mate.
Thanks for joining us on another edition of the Foundation Series. Make sure to head over to our website to subscribe to the Foundation Series for monthly editions featuring future interviews on startup compensation. In each edition, we'll explore the different strategies, trends, and challenges faced by startups around the world. If you have a burning topic you'd like me to cover or a standout guest that you want to hear from, drop me an email so I can dive deeper into the compensation topics that matter most to you. Join me next time as we continue to uncover the strategies and practices driving success in global tech startups around the world. Thanks for listening.